over the same month last year. You know, the last 3 months are trending down a little bit, and that will probably continue until we get a more sustainable growth pattern. That's 7 months, over $1 million extra has come in compared to 2020. 4.5, it's just distribution of several of the main categories. The big winner percentage-wise was drinking places, bars. Of course, they were almost completely shut down this same time last year, so they really could go nowhere but up. 4.6 quarter-cent radio tax. Like I said, last month the collections have stopped, but we will still get the distributions this month and in August, that will be our last month, but another good month. Probably total collections, when it's all said and done, will be in the $12.5 million range for the radio system. 4.7, half-cent state tax for roads, up as well, almost 13%. 168,000 came in this month. And that's all I have.
Any questions for Treasurer Hill? JP Essery?
Thank you. Can you kind of explain on the, looking at the radio tax? Number one, that sunset, so that's done, is that correct?
Yes, it's done.
And so it's no longer collected. And then the second thing is the excess money that more than what we had originally thought we would get from that, that's going to go to help with operating expenses in the future, is that correct?
It has to, every penny of that has to go somewhere to the radio system in some form or fashion. I'm not sure what they have planned, but it all has to go. It can't go anywhere else.
Yeah. And I guess I just want to again point out that the tax did sunset. I mean, there are a lot of people that say whenever you have a tax that sunsets, that never does, but this one certainly did.
Yes, that tax is over.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Treasurer Hill? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Next on the agenda was the Employees Insurance Report by Nelson Driver. I had Miss Patty forward you guys an email from Mr. Driver. He is recuperating after some surgery and could not make it this evening. He said his report, it looked good, but if you have any questions, email him. J.P. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering do we have any update on the insurance claims on the roof damage issue?
I don't. Mr. Driver didn't mention it. Chief of Staff Lester has no updates.
Do we know when that claim was filed?
Chief of Staff, will you come up here, please?
That claim was filed towards the end of last year. I think it was in November or so. The only update is we're working with a group that is taking a second opinion look at it because we've been given an offer. This group's looked at it. The offer that we got, or what the insurance wants to pay, was considerably lower than what we think it should be, and so we are working to get that corrected so that we get the correct amount to repair all the roofs that were damaged.
I don't know about my colleagues, but I'm getting real tired of hearing about leaky roofs. So we either need the claims settled and get them fixed, or we need to just get them fixed. Thank you.
With that, I think we'll move on. Item number 6, Comptroller Worthen.
Uh, 6.1 is the statement of operation, is expenses. And after 7 months, we should be at around 58.3%. And if you go to page 15, general fund overall is at 51.9%. And then on page 19, Overall, for all the funds for the whole county, we're at 45.1% of actual spending. Then item 6.2 is unappropriated reserve balance report. And this shows all the changes in the unappropriated reserves with the ordinances that affected the funds last month. And the overall, looks like the copy that got in the packet didn't have the summary at the bottom, but general fund is $3,102,073. Then the general reserve fund is $4,531,000. Then less the jail fund deficit, $1,899,988, gives a net balance in general fund at $5,702,616. And that's all I had.
Thank you, Comptroller Wortham. Any questions? Thanks, sir. All right. We do have a series of budget reviews this evening. Up first will be the Election Commission. If you're using your budget book, I believe this is on page 211. Ms. Price?
Okay. Are you
Feel
ready?
free, go ahead.
My name is Jennifer Price. I'm Director of Elections for Washington County, along with the election commissioners, Renee Olschlager, Jim Estes, and Max Deichler are here with me as well. So we are presenting a budget for the 2022 general election year, basically. So if you look at our budget, you should compare it to the 2020 budget, certainly not the 2021 budget. The increases that we're asking for are in expectation of a countywide runoff after the primary election, because we know right now we have three, stated candidates for lieutenant governor, which will most certainly cause us to have a countywide runoff. And then, of course, after the general election, we typically have runoffs for both the city of Fayetteville and the city of Springdale. So the most increases will be in payroll for poll workers because of the elections. And then, of course, for the extra truck rentals, Wi-Fi, the different election supplies, and all of those items that will pertain to having more elections next year than we did in 2020.
Are there any questions for Ms. Price? Oh, I'm gonna let you off easy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Also, a lot of ours is reimbursable as well, so that makes a difference as well. So,
Thank you so much for coming and giving us the opportunity. All right. Up next is the Circuit Court 3 budget. Judge Zimmerman. For those in the budget book, that's page 66.
All right, good evening, Justices. I believe that you received a packet when we submitted our budget, including an overview of the juvenile court.
Judge Zimmerman, let me interrupt you real quick.
Yes.
You got to move that microphone right in front of
Okay.
you there.
All
You
right,
guys
I'll
are going to have
spin
to canter it back and forth if you want to.
Okay. All right, so when we sent in our proposed budget for 2022, we also included an overview of what goes on in juvenile court and who the players are. And I know Judge Warren will be talking about this as well. the same sort of players that are in both of the courts. And I'm going to have Ms. Frisbee start us off with the numbers.
Our requested budget, can you hear me? Okay. Our requested budget for 2022 stayed pretty much the same except for two line items that I went ahead and removed. That's line item 2008 for tires. I don't foresee that we need tires for our two vehicles for next year. We just recently purchased new tires for them. And also the medical and dental hospital. We didn't seem to have used that $300 that we budget for in 2021. So I didn't budget for any for next year. So that's pretty much the only changes that we made to the budget. We submitted the description of what each line item is and what we pay out of each line item. So we're open to questions.
JP Essery. There you go.
Thank you. A couple of questions. One of them is, if I'm understanding correctly, that we increased the pay for some of the people over there earlier in the year. You're having trouble keeping people, and I'm wondering, am I on the right track here, or is it?
I think you're confusing us with the Juvenile Detention Center.
Okay.
So we have two juvenile courts now, Division 3 and Division 8. Judge Warren, she's going to present her budget in just a moment. So this is strictly for juvenile court services. We also have programs that we fund through the Quorum Court funding us. We have a youth reporting center in Springdale. We have 3 officers that work that program. We use the money in our fees to pay for 2 vehicles. So those vehicles are in conjunction with our youth reporting center, which is located on Emma Street in Springdale. So we have some unique type expenses in Division 3 budget, including 2 vehicles that we use for our medium to high risk probation or diversionary programs that we have.
Okay, and I apologize, I got that a little confused. But my second question is, this budget is exactly like last year's budget, pretty much. And I wonder how that with Judge Warren coming on, if that changes this in any way, because I know that some of her expenses and yours cross each other. And if you could help me with that.
That's a great question. So Division 3 is a JDAI approved court. That's a Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative Court. We became one of the first 2 in the state, along with Benton County, in 2012. So we implement best practices. We do risk assessments on the front end before a juvenile is detained and placed in the Juvenile Detention Center. That role is one of the juvenile court officer. So those officers are the same types of officers that Judge Warren is asking for salaries for. For the last 7 months, we have shared the juvenile court officers in Division 3 with Division 8. Because when that position was created, we didn't know who was going to be the judge. And so it became very apparent that the number of officers that we have working family in need of services cases, which handle all the truancy cases for every school in Washington County, and we have 4 FINS officers, that their caseloads were 50 to 60 cases per person, almost 100 kids per person, trying to monitor school attendance, services, and that sort of thing. So we're asking for the same number of juvenile court officers that we had last year in light of the fact that the population is growing, the caseloads are still heavy, and these children and families are in crisis, especially due to the pandemic. So it would be easy to say, oh, well, why does Division 3 need 16 officers and Judge Warren's division needs X, Y, or whatever? And it's because the population is growing so heavily that our officers cannot continue to carry the number of cases that they're carrying. In addition to that, Division 3 handles all the diversion programs that are in place currently. The Youth Reporting Center, which is down on Emma Street. The budget for that includes $1,000 a month rent for the 3 offices down there, Plus, the kids who come into that program are medium to high-risk kids. So we're giving them services locally in downtown Springdale so they will not end up at JDC. Division 8 kids that go through Judge Warren's court will still come through the Youth Reporting Center if she chooses to send them. It's a great program. But that amount in our budget, you're not going to see it in Judge Warren's budget because that's a program that we've already established with personnel that runs it, and they don't carry a regular caseload. With respect to the FINS cases, pretty much the same number of FINS officers that we have in Division 3, same number that Judge Warren's requesting, because 4 FINS officers cannot physically handle that many cases and kids and families if you think about how many schools there are in Washington County. So our budget is similar to Judge Warren's, and hers is similar to ours, except for the programs that we're already providing and services to the community and to the children that are not in Division 8.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that explanation. So basically, Judge Warren is actually in addition to.
That's
I
right.
just wanted to clarify that, and thank you for the good explanation. I appreciate that.
And I support her wholeheartedly in her budget request.
JP Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I should have asked this question several years ago, and the reason I'm asking, I'm looking at a budget that's got $200 line items and $500 line items, and then a $36,000 line item, and we give the same weight to all of them in the description. Could you explain line item 3009
Can I do that?
and where that money really goes?
Yes, sir. Okay.
And I have to turn this off every time.
Yes, sir. 3009 is other professional services. That covers a broad of things. A big portion of that is our ankle monitor services. Those are monitors that we use for kids to prevent them from staying in detention longer or from actually going to detention. So if we have a kid that could potentially be released from detention instead of staying in detention, if we have an ankle monitor, we'll release them with house arrest. So a big portion goes to that. We work really hard to try and get grants. We usually have 1 or 2 grants a year to try and cover a portion of that, but a big chunk of that money goes to ankle monitor services. The other is for our diversion programs. We have 8 total diversion programs. We pay paid activities, we pay instructors, we pay just a variety of different other professional services for our diversion programs. You're welcome.
Additional questions? Thank you so much for coming this evening and letting us learn about what you're doing. We appreciate
If I
it.
could, Justice, I would like to just commend our staff last year. We didn't slow down one day. We continued to hear hearings from March 16th when the in-person court shut down. We were having all of our hearings remotely, either by Zoom or in person. We held almost 4,000 hearings last year, and our staff, who several of them are here, they worked tirelessly to work with families remotely, going to the front yard and checking on the kids from the yard. So this is something that, and I know Judge Warren shares my view on this, that kids who work with, people that work with kids are just irreplaceable, and I just applaud the county's employees who work for our kids and families in Washington County. So thank you.
Thank you, Judge Zimmerman. All right, takes us to item number 9, Circuit Court 8 budget. Judge Warren. For us in the budget books, that's page number 90.
That's good. Good evening, and thank you so much for providing me this opportunity to talk to you about my requested budget for 2022. This is the first time that I've been able to come to the court to ask for funds. As you know, I was elected in November to take the seat in the newly created Division 8 Court, which was created to hear 1/2 of all of the juvenile court cases. So in this year, 2021, I have been working with the budget that was given to me, and I have been learning a lot about what budgets cover and what kinds of things I can anticipate having a need to pay for. The 2021 budget, which covers the period that I first took office, and we had our first hearing on January 4th, with Division 3 and Division 8, each hearing 1/2 of the juvenile court cases. The budget for Division 3 was $1.3 million. The budget for Division 8 was $16,000. I am asking you to please equally fund the 2 juvenile courts that we have in this county. Judge Zimmerman is correct. There are some programs that are specifically, that were grown through Division 3, they're funded by Division 3, and they should rightfully stay in Division 3. But the vast majority of the difference between the budgets of Division 3 and Division 8 is people. You know this because you're in charge of budgeting, and you know that when you talk people, you talk real money. So we currently have 21 juvenile court staff. 16 of those carry a caseload. All of those juvenile staff officers are budgeted through Division 3. They are hired by Division 3. They are supervised by Division 3, and they serve at the pleasure of Division 3. I am asking you, if you take nothing else away from my budget request, if you forget everything else I say, please allocate juvenile officers specifically to Division 8. This is good policy, and it's expected by the law. Several years ago, there was an assessment done of the juvenile courts throughout Arkansas, and the assessments came back with a few best practices, and one of those was for the juvenile officers to be hired by the juvenile judges and answerable to them and to serve at their pleasure. And that was incorporated into law. And so under 2 different provisions of the Arkansas Code, it is required that each juvenile division that handles juvenile cases shall be provided at least 1 probation officer and at least 1 intake officer who is employed by the judge of that court and who serves at the pleasure of that judge. And so I'm asking you, please, to allocate juvenile officers to me. It is good policy, it is best practice for juvenile courts, and it is expected by the law. So, how many? Well, that's a good question. So, there are several different organizations which have provided standards to look at how many juvenile officers could act at what kind of caseloads are appropriate. And the average caseload is recommended to be 25 clients per juvenile officer. So using the figures that we have provided and which Judge Zimmerman provided in her budget request to you and her justification letter to you, what we know is that there are currently 320 open FINS cases. Those are cases that are needed to be monitored by the FINS officers. That broken down is a caseload of about 80 clients per officer, as opposed to the 25. The probation officers have an open, 270 open probation cases. So the caseload is about 23 clients. We have, did I mention this? We have 12 delinquency officers and 4 FINS officers. Now, when I was here on the 29th, when the other judges were presenting their budgets, I heard the question from you, what is the impact of COVID on the courts? And what can the quorum court do to support the courts to get rid of the backlog of cases that has been created by COVID? Well, in the juvenile court system, the greatest impact of COVID has been on the truancy cases. I'm sure you've heard the news stories. I'm sure you've talked to family and friends who talk about what a nightmare education has been since we've had the COVID pandemic and we've had virtual school or in-person and COVID quarantines and everything else. And I can tell you there is a documented impact on the juvenile court. The cases we're holding fairly steady. So the truancies are handled through what is called the Family in Need of Services Cases, FINS. So in 2019, there were 272 FINS cases filed. In 2020, there were 299. So little under 300 cases. So far this year, as of June 30th, there have been 219 FINS cases filed. That's twice as many as we have had the 2 previous years. And the reason is because I can tell you, week after week, the schools come in and they have documentation of, I'm not talking 8 and 10, 12 absences. We're talking 30, 60, 80, 136 kids who have been dropped because they just didn't go. And here's the impact on the juvenile court. With the low number of FINS officers that we have, the affidavits for truancy cases that were signed by the school in May, the school came forward in May and said, hey, this young person has not been going to school, they've had so many absences, we want court supervision. We're not able to put those cases on the docket until January. That means there's a whole semester of the child's education that is going, we know they're at risk and we're not monitoring. And what could really help that is if we had more FINS officers, because the law says that anytime a school official submits an affidavit for a FINS case, the prosecutor either has to file it or put it on diversion. We don't have enough diversion staff to do a diversion, and so they file all of them, we have to have a court hearing, and we can't get that into the docket. So it would be extremely helpful if we could have more FINS officers so we could do more diversions so that we could get the problem taken care of and get the services to the young people and the family before we lose a whole other semester of education. Truancy is a problem. Truancy is one of the first signs of misbehavior which can lead to delinquent behavior, substance abuse, unemployment, poverty, and it's also a warning sign of neglectful behavior or abusive behavior. So truancy, there are programs out there that can really focus on truancy and getting kids into school. We need to be focusing on those because this COVID impact is not going to be just this year, and it's not going to end just when kids get back into school, because some of these kids are behind on credits. We're seeing kids who only have 5 credits in their sophomore year and they need 20 to graduate. They're not going to graduate on time. So we really need to talk about what kinds of programs we can put in place to make sure that we tackle this truancy issue now, and we're going to have to deal with it for the next 3 to 5 years for sure. So so that's why I think it's really important that we have suitable officers for the cases that we have. So again, if you'll look at my budget, I'm asking for a very significant increase. I really wish that I were like Judge Beaumont, who came in last week and said she wanted less money, but that is not the position I'm in. I am asking you, please, to raise my budget from $16,000 to something that is more comparable. I think that my overall budget was approximately $490,000, which is slightly less than half of the budget that Division III requested in 2021. So I think that it is in keeping. Most of the numbers that I got from my budget for most of the items was basically half of what Division III asked for last year. I thought that was a good model. Judge Zimmerman's been a good steward of the court's money, and I think that she spends it wisely, and so that's basically it. So my court handles half of all the juvenile cases. There is an additional expense because I also handle all of the criminal cases where juveniles are charged as adults, and that means we have jury trials. So there's a line item for jury trials, which is not in Division III. So there is some money for that. The other thing that I would just say is that I think it's important to build an ethos and a character of a court and I want my own people to do it. If you've ever been an employer or an employee, you know you need to know who's in charge. And I want employees of my own to build my programs and my systems just as Judge Zimmerman has been able to do. So I would very much ask, I think the standard is 25 cases per juvenile officer, and I think that you've got the numbers there. That's what my budget is based on, and that would be my request of the court. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Judge Warren? J.P. Johnson.
Thank you, Judge. As we discussed one day last week, this is another big ask of many big asks. And almost all of those big asks are not one-time asks. We're going to ask the taxpayers to pay this money forever and probably compounded at 1.3 or 1.4% every year. So this group has got some tough decisions to make. But what I'm going to ask you is put your crystal ball on for a minute. We're going to talk tonight again about the design work and the expansion of the Juvenile Justice Center. Tell me what you think it's going to look like down there when we get that facility done.
Well, I've not had the opportunity to see the plans that I believe that there are some plans. I haven't had the opportunity to study those in detail. But my understanding is that the long-term goal is to expand the South Campus so that both courts are down there and all juvenile officers are housed down there, which I think has some great benefits. I do think that the parking situation at the annex where I am now is less than ideal. So I think that definitely is an idea. I still, even if we're all at the same campus, think that it is best if the juvenile officers are dedicated to a particular court. I think that there are two main factors that go into that. One, I think, is logistics. Judge Zimmerman and I have been working diligently to stay out of each other's way and not have the same juvenile officers or attorneys or whatever be in the same courts at the same time. But those logistics will continue to be an issue whether you're across town or in the same building. So that's one consideration. The other consideration is, like I mentioned, the ethos and the character. I have big goals. I have big plans. And I have I've already applied for a grant to get some software to get a better handle on our numbers. I think the first thing we need to do is make sure we have good numbers about what kind of cases we have coming in, what services do we actually provide, how long do those cases last, why do they end, what can we do better to do better services, more importantly. But the first thing is to get good numbers. To get good numbers, I need to have my staff that I know exactly what they're doing. We have clarity on their role, their expectations, their data collection, and what all that works. And I have been ever so thankful for being able to borrow Judge Zimmerman's staff. They are fantastic. They're great. It's wonderful. If I could have some people who are experienced as they are, I would be very appreciative. And I've been very thankful that she's been sharing those people with me. But I think that in order to set goals, assess strategies and tactics, and build going forward, it's important to have a team, and I would like to build a Division 8 team.
I'm trying to understand if 2 years from now or 4 years from now, this is going to be a $4 million budget.
Well, I certainly hope not. My plan would be to reduce the numbers. That's where I'm headed with this whole thing. I think what we need to be looking at, so I've only been on the bench for 7 months. I still have a lot to understand. But I'm already feeling frustrated that in some of these cases, I'm ordering the delinquents or the truancy kids to go to school and not use drugs. They're already not supposed to do that. And so I'm anxious to build ways, just like the programs that have been developed by Division III for delinquency courts. We have the Youth Reporting Center, and we have some partnerships that I think are really beneficial. But I think there's a lot of room to grow with the FINS cases, which hopefully won't turn into delinquency cases. I mean, I think that there are sort of red flag cases. So what I would really look to do is work to not make that happen. What I think we need to do is first get good numbers about what we're doing now. Assess what works and what doesn't. Then do some goal setting. And our goal is to reduce the number of kids who come into the system initially, reduce the amount of time that they spend connected to the system, and try to make sure that we have services that are effective so that we don't see those kids back. The statistics and the data show that once a juvenile comes to court, they're more likely to come back. So we need to bump up our diversion cases so that they never see the judge. And if they see me once, I don't want to see them again. And so we want to make sure that we keep them out of court, because the statistics and the data show that the less contact they have, the better off they are. You normalize that experience of coming to court, and then they start getting a culture of criminality, and we don't want to do that. So my goal is to not have a bigger ask. My goal is to get in there, assess it, develop goals and strategies, and be able to come back with less of a budget in 2 or 4 years.
JP Simons.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Judge Warren. 2 questions. One, the Juvenile Reporting Center on Emma, is that task?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm familiar. I've toured it once, and I wanted to make sure I was not assuming that that's what you were talking about. What is their capacity? So when these juveniles are reporting into that, are we talking about 30 or 50, or are we talking about hundreds?
You know, I should know that, but I don't. Ms. Norma Frisbee would be the person who knows that.
Is there any programs like that that the school does? Is there any assistance that we get from the individual schools themselves when they're reporting truancy? Are they hedging any of the?
The Youth Reporting Center was really designed to be an alternative to the Juvenile Detention Center, so that there would be an alternative to detention. I don't believe that the school has any comparable facility. One of the tactics that is used, and part of what Judge Zimmerman referred to in the JDAI initiative, is to form partnerships and develop memorandum of understanding with the schools in order to help those partnerships so that you know what the school does and what the court does. I think that's an ongoing conversation. I currently, my court doesn't have any kind of a memorandum of understanding with the school. Again, it's a capacity issue. Once I have a team of players and I know what I have to work with, I would certainly like to explore that. And I think that part of that conversation, as has been done with the JDAI process, is to figure out what the school can do so that they can resolve issues at the school and not have to resort to reporting the family and the youth to the court. So I think that there's, the short answer is no. I don't think the school has any comparable system, because the YRC is really kind of a judicial limitation that is definitely judicial in nature.
Sure. So in my limited exposure to this particular subject, I've got 2 young kids that were previously in the school system, and I can't remember exactly the number, but if I drop my kids off a little late, they get a truancy. If we get to 3 or 4 truancies, I get a call from the prosecutor. It's probably more my fault than my kids' fault, right? My kids shouldn't wind up in a detention center because I can't get them on to school all the time.
I think any of us as parents have experienced some frustration with, who have children in public school, would have some frustration with the whole grade and attendance communication system. But I guarantee you that the young people who end up in court adjudicated offense are not those children who have 3 or 4 tardies and you're getting a warning. I mean, because let's say that you don't resolve that at that level. And it may be just calling the school and saying, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you I had a doctor's appointment, orthodontist, whatever. I mean, that situation is mostly resolved by that, and the parent resolves that with the school without any ongoing issue. But if it does get to the prosecutor, then the prosecutor is first going to have well, before that, it's going to go to the FINS intake officer. That's going to be the first person who looks at it, and they're going to determine whether or not they even need to take it to the prosecutor. Maybe there's a way that they can divert it without even going anywhere. And then if they determine that they need to show it to the prosecutor, they do, and then the prosecutor can decide whether or not to file. They have to make sure that the people live in the right place, and we've got an actual custodian that we can locate, and all those kinds of things. And then if it goes to adjudication, then it might go away rather quickly. I mean, you're not going to get adjudicated to be a FINS unless it's established that there is a problem where the problem occurred, the school reached out to the family, tried to work with the family to resolve it, the school was unable to resolve it for whatever reason, then came back. But we're seeing a lot of problems with, with virtual attendance. The young people say they're on their computer doing their work. Mom and dad have to go to work. They come home at the end of the day. They say, Billy, did you do your job? Your homework? Oh, yeah. What do you know? So there's a lot of problems with that. And then there's other problems. I mean, COVID has just, done a number on our education system. So, but it's not going to be the orthodontics and doctor's appointments that you forgot to send a note for.
JP Duncan.
Thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate all the insight, too. I had just a couple questions for you. You mentioned recommendation to have 25 cases per, is it FINS officer? Is that interchangeable, FINS officer with probation officer, or are those two different functions?
So the only statutory clarification that there is that you cannot serve both as an intake officer and a probation officer. There's not really a juvenile, those are the only two statutory categories of juvenile officer. So the schema that has been used in Division 3 is to have probation officers, FINS officers, and intake officers. I'm anticipating not making that division necessarily, and so there would be intake officers, and then there would be juvenile officers that would handle FINS or probation. Because really, I think in essence, the role of the juvenile officer is to monitor the young person and to refer them for services, and so I'm not sure that the distinction between FINS and probation is as important.
Makes sense. So you mentioned the current caseload. You said something like 80 some odd cases. Is that per probation officer, or is that per intake officer today?
Well, that's in general the juvenile officers, so I did not have the data to break that down between intake and probation officer.
Okay. Because you mentioned something like another group had 23 cases.
So there's FINS, and so the data, and this was provided to you by Judge Zimmerman in her justification letter. That's where those numbers come from. And so I think my numbers were that there are currently 320 open FINS cases. And her numbers say that we have 2.5 to 3.5 FINS officers. I think that she was saying that was 4. So I divided 320 by 4. So I think that's a caseload of 80 clients.
Okay.
And then the probation was, I believe, 270 open probation cases, and her numbers were that there were 12 delinquency officers, which were intake, diversion, and probation. So that's where I got those numbers, and that was the 23 was for
Okay.
probation officers.
That's what I was wondering. I know you all are looking at this on a daily basis rather than just hearing about it. But would it make sense to reallocate some of the officers among the group, or if you have one area that has just 23 and the other one has 80, would that make sense to do? And I'm seeing a head shaking no, so maybe not.
Well, Judge Zimmerman has 20 years on me on managing the court staff and how they can be allocated and used. And so I certainly think that that she would have insight about what is possible. I can tell you that from my position, I am certainly very flexible. I am flexible about whether we have new money or use our existing money to reallocate. I am flexible about whether we divide FINS probation. I am flexible in lots of different ways. Again, my big ask is just that I be allocated some officers for Division 8 that I can work with as my team.
Okay, I understand. So you're asking for specific to your court? Group
Yes,
8.
please.
And then the next question I had was just around the executive assistant ask. Does Judge Zimmerman have an executive assistant, and is that an absolute necessity?
Well, I'll let Judge Zimmerman speak to her staff. I think that the currently, the people that I have in my office are me and my trial court assistant and my court reporter and my bailiff. My trial court assistant is able to do all of what she needs to do now. The anticipation is that if we get staff, that there would be some additional administrative and court management work that she would do, and it would be helpful to have a person who answers the phone, which rings nonstop, and does some other things like that. Now, the one thing that I am asking for is I'm asking for a community program resource assistant. That is the person that I am really hoping will take charge of coordinating with community partners to develop, monitor, and assess, and build programs. That's what that person would do. So if you're looking to cut somewhere, I will just tell my trial court administrator that she can do a little bit more work. And I'll let Judge Zimmerman speak to her budget.
No, that's fair. That's what I'm getting at, I guess, is obviously sounds like there's an immense need, and just trying to understand if we were to stack rank the need for this next year and go, okay, what do we absolutely have to have? What does that look like? Because to me, this is like perfect scenario, perfect situation. This is the staff that's needed. But if we were to go, okay, no, bare bones, here's absolutely what's needed. Is it an intake officer and a FINS officer and the community resources program manager, or what? Just help me understand that.
Okay, so I think that my first ask would just be for the officers. That would be my ask. And so if you're really looking, I think that the biggest ask is that we're asking for more staff rather than just a reallocation of the current staff. And I think that that's one big question that the court will ultimately have to decide. Because I think that, the request for staff over the last several years has been rather consistent. And so this is a big change. And we have another court. So, I mean, I don't want to suggest that we would delve into Division 3 budget, but I mean, that's an option. I mean, just reallocate some officers from Division 3 to Division 8. That would be an option.
Thank you.
And the other thing is, I suppose you could do it in stages, right? I mean, there's, I'm asking for this number this year. I mean, maybe you say we can only increase the staff by this much this year, and you have to get by. I mean, I just think that I will make do with the number of officers that you can justify allocating to Division 8. I will make it work. I just want to have my own team to do that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
JP Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm trying to understand, is there a workload that we are now splitting between two judges, or is there a new workload that's being developed outside of what the one judge was doing previously?
Well, I will give both judges the opportunity to comment to that. But we're splitting a workload between two judges. But their message to us is that their workload is high.
Understand.
And there's a couple things I want to point about this budget. I appreciate Judge Warren. She gave me a call after we after I sent out my letter instructing about how to present the budget. And she has a special case scenario, and I appreciate her being patient and basically going with the system. But if you look down at the bottom, that personnel cost that we're adding here, that $584,000, I want the committee to realize that that will come out of the unappropriated reserves that we're scheduling of $5.5 million that we talked about at the front end of the budget. That would be new spending, and that's why it's not up in the top portion of the budget. I just have some comments the way I see the lay of the land. You're in a temporary spot. We know that in terms of your physical location. That's not ideal by any means. It's not ideal for a lot of reasons in terms of costs of security and transport and all that kind of stuff. So I want us to bear that in mind. I also want us to, there's going to be a lot of sacrifice by the county to get that JDC expanded, and I think that's everyone's goal. I want to tell you how much I appreciate both of your courts and the work that you do, but I need you guys to help us out, and I need you guys to work together, and I need to know what you absolutely need to make it work in the short term. You know, there's a couple things that you said. You're saying, well, we want to scale up and then possibly scale back. I don't know that that's ever a reality in government. And what I would like to challenge you with is, let's get you some people. Let's get you, I love that you're talking about, let's drive this with data. Let's get some numbers. Let's see where we're going. And then let's get a plan of where we're going with the thought process that we will all be in the same building, hopefully in a couple years. And that's what I would like to challenge you and Judge Zimmerman to do. I think also when we balance things, I like the metric of caseloads per officers and all that, but I go talk to Prosecutor Durrett, and he has caseloads per prosecutors. I talk to, public defender, the defender's office, they have, what I'm saying is I think we're all trying to make sacrifices, and I would challenge you to do as much as you can to help us get you in that building and get us where we need to go.
I totally appreciate that, and I think that even this entire year we've been balancing that. When I moved into the courtroom, there was an amount of money that was provided to do some technological things, and then when we talked to the technicians, they were talking about some extra bells and whistles, and we didn't go there because we thought, well, it's temporary. We're not going to set this up for the gold standard. We just need to get by until hopefully we get back into the new thing. I did ask, in terms of housing the officers at Division 8 where we are now, I think initially the grounds people thought that I was talking about like building out the whole building, which is not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about some cubicles, cubicles and a laptop and a cell phone. I mean, because they're going to have their computers and their cell phone even if they're down there at South Campus. So I'm just talking about some temporary things to get us down there. And actually in the development of my budget, basically what I built that on was taking the number of officers that had been asked for in 2021 and dividing it in half, saying that I would just have one half of the officers, because I think my actual budget that I asked for only asks for, let's see where I am. The actual budget that I submitted only has 9 officers. Really, according to the standards that I was talking about and how the caseloads, it would really be 13. But in the actual budget that I put in, I only put in 9. So it's not, I don't think I'm shooting high and looking to overshoot. I think that what I based my budget on was one half of the current number of juvenile officers, which is what the court previously thought was justifiable in terms of servicing the court. I'm just asking that the resources be divided as the caseload is, one half per Division 3, one half per Division 8.
Gotcha. J.P. Simons.
Thank you, Chair. In Judge Zimmerman's proposal, she denotes here that currently the state reimburses Washington County for 17 juvenile court officer positions at $15,000 per certified juvenile officer. Do we know whether or not that's going to increase, or are we kind of stuck with that regardless of whether we have one or two courts?
Excellent question. I've been asking the same one myself.
It'd be nice if we could get
By
17 more.
So by statute, the state reimburses the counties up to $15,000 with a limit of 200 of those positions statewide. So currently, Division III has 17 of those positions. So I've inquired with the Administrative Office of the Courts about what the process might be to request some for Division VIII. And basically, the response that I got is, well, you can ask that, you can ask the Judicial Council to reallocate some of those from Division III to Division VIII, or you could maybe ask for some more. But I think that AOC would be more inclined to award those the reimbursements to communities where their population has dwindled and they may not have the tax base to support an officer. So I don't have any great inclination that the AOC would be lining up to give the 4th Judicial District more of those. So some of those could potentially be reallocated from Division III to Division VIII, but I don't know that, I just don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that they wouldn't. I just, that the path forward to getting any more reimbursed officers here at this time is unclear to me at this point. But we do have 17 of them in Division III.
Thank you.
I think the look at some reallocation has got to be looked at, and what I'm hearing tonight is that it hasn't been looked at. And I'm not saying that that totally makes sense. I'm saying I want us to vet that out and make sure it's not viable. Are there additional questions for Judge Warren? Thank you. Judge Zimmerman, did you want a chance to respond to some of this?
I do, if I could.
If you could briefly.
And maybe it would be helpful if Judge Warren stayed up here, because we're on the same team here. So I think that one thing that
You got to pull that mic right in
I
front
think
of
that
you.
one thing that's really important that we look at is that juvenile court is a different animal than adult division. So when you look at juvenile court probation officers, they handle cases that are already filed. A kid that's put on probation and they have a probation officer. When a citation comes through juvenile court, it doesn't go to Elm Springs or Springdale District Court or one of the other district courts. It comes straight through to juvenile court. And so the intake officers that Judge Warren discussed, they are handling those cases before they even become a case. And we try to divert cases that will never be filed, but we have to have the juvenile court officers that look them over, talk to the prosecutor about it, and then decide to divert. And last year, we diverted about 500 cases. That means delinquency criminal cases that were never filed. So I cannot express enough about how much I support Judge Warren's request, which I think is 9 officers plus a coordinator. And so we're looking at citations countywide, and juvenile court officers are handling those cases. They're not filed yet, but they're criminal citations. And we do have the data. We've been doing JDAI, Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative data, since 2012. We can tell you how old the kids are that are going to detention, what their race is, what their sex is, what was the charge, how long they stayed in detention. And we have the data. And our data tells us, and our goals in JDI are very straightforward: to reduce kids being locked up, to expedite cases. On delinquency cases, we are handling cases from detention hearing pretty much through, they're done within 3 to 4 months. That's really fast when you think about the criminal system. When you listened to Matt Durrett last night, he said ways to get these cases going. Well, you have diversion programs at the front end. So we have, in both courts, diversion programs where you don't even have the kid go through court. That's not a counted case for 25 cases for a person on probation because they're not on probation. So if we worked in 2019, we had about 500 cases. These are criminal cases diverted. One of our juvenile court officers, call him a diversion officer, call him an intake officer. They are working those cases at the front end to get services to kids and families. And so I support Judge Warren in her request for intake officers and diversion officers. You'll need one for the FINS cases. All those affidavits coming from the school to the FINS intake officer. She has a meeting with a family, says this is what you need to do to get your kid on track. These are the services. If you can do these services, we'll call and set it up. You won't even have to go see Big Bad Wolf. And now we've got another Big Bad Wolf. So there are two Big Bad Wolves they don't want to see. So those cases are being worked at the beginning before a case has been filed. And it seems like we're in this airplane and we've got a metal seat, maybe oxygen. We have no stewardess. We have no beverages. We just are in the cockpit doing the best we can. Our population is going up. And to say that we are going to take half of these officers who already have more cases than what is the best practice, and then you add in all these cases that never get to be cases because they're handled by juvenile court diversion officers to get kids and families help, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, if you had to look at what's more important, a building or Judge Warren having her staff of 9, 10 people to help kids and families in Washington County when the population is skyrocketing. To me, if you don't invest in your children, in your families, as Judge Warren said, they're going to end up in jail, they're going to end up in prison. We also use objective risk assessments under JDI. So in the middle of the night, when one of our juvenile officers, they have the phone 24/7, they have to make a decision using a risk assessment in the middle of the night, whether or not that kid should go to detention. It's not for the police officer in the field to decide. That trained juvenile officer uses an objective risk assessment as to whether or not that kid should go into detention. That's not something that goes on in the adult world. That case may be never filed, but that's a case that is worked by the juvenile officer. And as far as mixing FINS officers and delinquency officers, the state has imposed now a savory risk assessment that has to be done on every kid that is on probation. Takes 4 hours to do that one assessment. So the job duties of a probation officer versus a FINS officer are similar in that they're to get services and help the family and get the kid on the right track, but it's also different in the types of risk assessments that they have to do. And I get fired up and I get passionate about it because Judge Warren needs her team. She is not just asking for carpet or whatever. She's asking for these officers and to say, okay, we're going to take half out of Division 3 and continue the workload of the juvenile officers who are there. I think it's a travesty. So I just want you to think about that when you're thinking about Judge Warren's budget. I think her numbers are very accurate. I think she makes excellent points. And the ultimate decision, just like ours, is a hard decision, and you're going to have to make that decision.
Yes, I appreciate that.
So I appreciate
and I
it
know
very
you're very
much.
passionate. I
I get
appreciate
fired
your
up.
passion. Yes, and I'm asking you guys for help to work
Yes.
with us because I understand this need is great, and we have, just like J.P. Johnson alluded to, we have another list of great needs
I know.
in this county. I mean, I think the philosophy is, unlimited needs, finite resources, so I'm asking you guys to please help us. I'm not saying, I don't think anybody, I invite all the justices to visit with these two judges and learn more about this, and let's see where we can go efficiently as possible. So I appreciate you guys. It's been very informative. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming tonight. I've been asked a couple questions about the process, so we know that we have a couple more special budget meetings at the end of the month. One of those we're going to hear from the judge and his staff. And the other one we're going to hear from the sheriff. Those are two big budgets. So I welcome you guys to look ahead, ask questions ahead of time, be looking at those budgets. What I want to do is, in the regular September meeting, we will start passing these budgets, and I want to roll back through them in case there's any revisions that need to be made, and we'll pass them on to the full quorum court at that particular time. So that's just kind of from a scheduling side where I see us going. All right, we're going to go into new business now. The first item on our agenda, an ordinance appropriating $250,000 from the American Rescue Plan Fund to the small equipment line item in the American Rescue Plan budget. I believe this is an ask from the Election Commission, and I would invite Ms. Price or whoever to come back up here and kind of walk us through this, and let's hear about what they're foreseeing.
Do I do that? Yes, so in 2016, the Election Commission received new voting equipment, partially funded by the Secretary of State's office and partially funded by the county. Of the pieces of equipment we received, the DS200, which is the ballot box, the Express Votes, which is the marking devices, and the electronic poll books. Of those three devices, the electronic poll books had the shortest life expectancy of all of the voting equipment. The other two pieces of voting equipment we think should last at least 10 more years before we have to actually replace those pieces. The poll books are just simply like your iPad that you use at home, and you know that those life expectancies are really short for that type of electronic equipment. So at the end of 2020, we started noticing we were having more and more poll books that were not functioning. They weren't holding charges, they weren't loading the elections, they weren't communicating with the central point, which allows the poll books to talk from one polling place to another polling place, which is essential for us to be able to do vote centers and have early vote on election day. And so it became apparent that going into 2022 that we were really going to have difficulties making sure that we had enough poll books to make sure that we could actually, function like we should on election day. Today is an election day for the city of Fayetteville. I've already had to visit 2 polling locations to work with poll books that functioned when we loaded them, loaded everything correctly, but unfortunately during the day, they have gone offline and they're no longer working for us. And so that's why we're coming to the Quorum Court to ask for money to replace those that particular piece of voting equipment before we go into the 2022 election year.
Ms. Price, I'd like for you to start at us at an elementary level. I know we've had conversation, but I'll make sure. First of all, what is the poll book? Please highlight what challenges we've seen from the pandemic and how these new poll books might help us with that.
Sure.
For the justices. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So the poll book basically is the first thing that you see when you come into the polling location. That's where we check the voter in. That's where we confirm their name, their address, their date of birth. They're able to sign the poll book, and then it prints the barcode, which is a really unique feature for us for our voting equipment because it eliminates human error when we are looking at making sure that the correct ballot is pulled up for the correct voter. And so that's the very first piece of equipment that we use on election day. It's kind of like the heart of the system because it also talks to all the other poll books in the county and prevents voters from going from one location to another location and try and cast a ballot. So during the pandemic, we realized that, our poll workers worked for 2 weeks basically during early vote, and then of course election day, and saw close to over 80,000 voters during that time period. And we dealt with the COVID, and one of the things that we saw was how do we eliminate the exchange between the voter and the poll worker when they come into the polling location? Where can we eliminate contact to make sure that we keep our poll workers safe and our voters safe during the election day? And so the new poll books have a unique feature in the fact that they will be able to scan an Arkansas driver's license, which would essentially allow us to go to a touchless scanning system when we are able to check in our poll books. Now, not every voter will show an Arkansas driver's license, so we still would be required to check them in. Voters are not required to show that particular piece of ID, but we do know that probably about 98% of the voters who come in to vote do show an Arkansas driver's license. So the goal is, going forward, we know that election years will be, just as busy. Next year, we know that we're still dealing with COVID. We know that our poll workers are of a certain age where they are more susceptible to having complications with COVID. This allows us to continue to make sure that we are making sure that we are limiting the contact between the voters and the poll workers at the polls on Election Day.
Great, and a couple elements I'll highlight from our conversation. Benton County's going through this same process. If we can coordinate with them, we might see some volume buying discounts. And then also, I think an important takeaway I took from our conversation is a little bit of timeliness in this so we can get the new poll books here so that you can start training your poll workers and so that we'll be ready for the primary, well, the elections in general, but the primaries next year. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have been working closely with Benton County, so there are some shared costs that we might be able to coordinate with Benton County in regards to training for our staff and delivery. Benton County has already passed the funding for their voting, for this new piece of voting equipment. And so we're just, they're kind of waiting to see if we're able to come up with the funds. And then, of course, we will have to, it's a different type of tablet stand, so that means we will have to rework our South Campus where we store our voting equipment. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we have our poll workers trained and, of course, our staff, and create manuals. So when you look at your poll workers who work on Election Day, they come in and they train for about 2 hours for mandatory training. We offer supplemental training, but we're asking them to do this huge task with very limited training and know all the Arkansas laws and make sure that we're following all the proper procedures. So we try and develop the best manuals and the best training that we can for our poll workers, and having the ability to do that this year before we get into before we get into all of the different things that go into preparing for the primary would definitely be a benefit for the Election Commission and, of course, for our poll workers.
JP Simons.
Thank you, Chair. Have you looked into diagnostic repair of the existing, so before replacement, have we looked at updates and repairs to get them functioning and kind of limp on by? So,
Sure. So the first thing I thought was, well, how much will it be to replace just a poll book that we have? So the current poll books to replace will be about $800, but the new poll books are $1,200. So it just didn't make sense to replace our current poll books when we know that, if not next year, definitely by 2024, we're going to need poll books. And we can't mix and match the two. That was my first question is, can we get some of the new poll books? Will they work with the old poll books? And they won't. It's either replace what we currently have or try and buy some to get along before 2024. But it just really didn't make sense to spend $20,000, $30,000 on equipment that, in 2 years from now, we know will definitely need to be replaced.
have we looked into grants?
Yes, of course. I visited with the Secretary of State's office to see if they had funding for the poll books. They came back to us, of course, they did not have funding. A lot of the counties that got their new voting equipment in 2016, Sebastian County, Crawford County, Benton County are already looking to try and replace their poll books as well. So the state did not have funding for us to replace the poll books. They still will pay for the maintenance and the software of the poll books. So really all we're purchasing is the actual poll book itself.
Okay. Can you break down this $250,000 ask? How many poll books are we talking about at the new rate, I'm assuming, of the $1,200 each?
$1,215 each, and so that would be 166 poll books. And then when you have the software, the initial software to put it in, and shipping, training, their setup fees, and then taxes, it comes to, excluding taxes, it comes to $219,000. But by the time you add taxes and then whatever else might be in there, we asked for $250,000 just to make sure that we had sufficient funds.
I think coming on the heels of Judge Warren and
Sure.
Judge Zimmerman, I
Sure.
think you can understand that there's not any room for padding. So I appreciate the need, and I'm hearing this, but we're juggling needs everywhere. So I would like to see a to the penny, this is what it will cost. and
So
not
it's
any more.
$219,000. And then if you add the sales tax, which I believe the sales tax would be,
10%.
yeah, so that would be what it would be. So $219,000 plus sales tax.
Okay.
And I
Thank you.
don't have a calculator, so I can't do that math real quick.
Any other questions? JP Esri?
Thank you very much. My only question is, what's the life expectancy of the new ones?
So we think the new ones will last longer. Of course, these lasted for 5 years. And so the new ones, the tablets we currently have are just a tablet itself. It sits on a stand where the stand itself has several cords, and we're constantly fighting with the cords to turn the display table to the voters. These will actually come housed in their own stand itself, so we're not taking them out of stands. They will stay in that stand. So we expect the life expectancy of these to be a bit longer than the current ones that we have. Quite honestly, when ES&S was putting together this package of election equipment, they had the express vote idea and they had the DS200 idea, and then the tablets were almost like an afterthought, and so they just bought off the shelf. These aren't, specially designed tablets or anything like that, and so they just put the software on it. So now that they've had time to kind of look at the system, they've actually come up with a different type of a stand and tablet for us.
Any other questions? I'd entertain a motion on this particular ordinance. JP Johnson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we pass this on to the quorum court with a due pass recommendation.
I have a motion to pass by JP Johnson, a second by JP Wilson. Is there any further discussion? Any public comments? Okay, all those in favor? Those opposed? Item 10.1 moves on to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation. Item number 11, an ordinance appropriating $3,750 from the unappropriated reserves in the general fund to the other professional services line item in the Circuit Court 8 budget for 2021. Judge Warren, are you back up? If you would, introduce us and walk us through this so we can understand it.
I am so sorry to be back here. I cannot tell you how little I am interested in asking you for more money, and yet I find myself in the uncomfortable position that I'm having to do it. So you just heard Judge Zimmerman give an explanation that law requires that we conduct savory assessments on juveniles in order to determine what their needs are. Most of the time, those are conducted by the probation officers, and there is no extra expense per se. However, in those cases where the juvenile is not a native English speaker and they need interpretation services, then we have to have an interpreter assist with the savory assessment. That line item that comes out of is other professional services, and my 2021 budget did not include any money for other professional services. So I currently have a person who needs an interpreter and for an assessment, and so that is the basis of the ask. I anticipate that this amount of money would cover the need for interpreters for any remaining savory assessments for the remainder of the year. And again, I am so sorry I have to come and ask you for this money.
Maybe a simplistic question, but I'm assuming you put money in your new budget for this type of service.
Yes,
That's right.
sir.
Okay. Any questions for Judge Warren on this? I'd entertain a motion. Second. I have a motion to pass the full quorum court by J.P. Simons, a second by J.P. Duncan. Any further discussion? Any public comment? All those in favor? Those opposed? Item 11.1 moves to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you very much.
Item number 12 is a discussion on increasing the county's salary ranges by 10% and merit-based raises. I think most of us were at the committee meetings last night, and we heard this presented in personnel. Personnel has sent us a recommendation based upon the Johansson's Group's recommendations, and that is to increase all of our salary ranges for the grades 10%, and then also consider a 3.5% merit-based raise for our employees. And so I think that this is I've spent a lot of time working on this. I appreciate JP Ecky's time on this as chairwoman of the Personnel Committee. I think it's a good step for our county. I wanted to do this on the front end of the budget. The actual mechanics took us a little longer, but there were some cost estimates given to us last night. This is going to cost us around $1.3 million. So this is a big investment for us, but I think it's well worth it for our county employees. So I welcome any discussion or questions. I myself, or I believe JP Ecky, would even be open to trying to address any questions or discussion items that anybody has. If not, what I'd like to do is, the way we mechanically have to handle this is we will handle the raises through budget controls, which we will pass in November. And so I would like to recommend that we make a motion to have those drafted into the budget controls when we see them in November. And I would like to take a vote on that this evening. I have a motion to recommend those be drafted into the budget controls by J.P. Johnson, second by J.P. Wilson. All those in favor? Aye. That passes. We will draft those in when we see our budget controls. Agenda item number 13, an ordinance appropriating $125,000 from the unappropriated reserves in the general fund to the other professional services line item in the building and grounds budget for 2021. J.P. Johnson, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This, we've all heard in the recent past about the operator or the elevator in the annex building that doesn't operate. I think the judge and the chief of staff have expended all effort trying to make it work, and it can't be made to work. So what this money will do will be allocate the funds or appropriate the funds to take bids to put a replacement elevator in that unit. So I move we pass this on to the quorum court with a due pass recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have a motion to pass with due pass recommendation to the full quorum court by J.P. Johnson, a second by J.P. Duncan. Any discussion? Any public comments? All those in favor? Aye. That will move forward to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation. Item number 14, an ordinance appropriating $250,000 from the American Rescue Plan Fund 3046 to the engineering/architecture line item 3004 in the buildings and grounds budget for 2021. I believe that this has been updated. We had paper copies supplied to us. County Attorney Lester's last night brought up at the jails and law enforcement meeting where this originated that the expenditure can come out of the American Rescue Plan Fund, and that's preferred so that the county can track those expenditures. There's no need to move it to outside of the American Rescue Plan Fund. So there's been a line item created, and like I said, we were given paper copies of that before the meeting. I've since lost mine, but you can see the updated accounts. Nothing else has changed. It's just the way we're going to record and handle the money. J.P. Johnson, would you like to speak to this? I'm sorry.
Thank you. We've heard lots of discussion from Judge Zimmerman and Judge Warren about the Juvenile Justice Center tonight. And in 2019, we were sitting here, and the intent was to have this project completed before the new District 8 judge was elected. Obviously, the COVID situation put a halt on that, and it went to the back burner. What this money will do was it will appropriate the money to restart the design process so that we can get the engineering work and the architectural work completed, so that if we had a funding mechanism at that time, we can go for bids and get this work done. And I think there's just way too many reasons to get it done. And we've heard many of them tonight, so I move we pass this on to the quorum court with a due pass recommendation.
I have a motion to pass with a due pass recommendation by J.P. Johnson.
Second.
Second by J.P. Esri. Any further discussion? Any public comments? All those in favor? Those opposed? Item number 14 moves on to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation. Item number 15 is an ordinance appropriating $250,000 from the American Rescue Plan Fund 3046 to the engineering architecture line in the Buildings and Grounds budget. Once again, we have an updated, we have an updated ordinance. It is on the screen. It's the same update as we saw previously to take this all just out of one plan. You know, we know we've been on a long journey in our criminal justice system in this county, and you know, working with the sheriff, I realize some of the pressures that we're seeing down there. I think this is an extremely important thing to do for the county to keep officers and detainees safe. Like J.P. Johnson, this ordinance is a lot of the same. This is to get us started on engineering and architectural details so that we get even a more focused cost of what this is going to end up costing when it's all said and done. You know, one of the things that stands out to me is, you know, we're 18 months out from this in construction. I think that's a very optimistic timeline. So I'm very interested to get this started. So I'll move passage of 15.1 to the full quorum court with the due pass recommendation.
Second.
I have a second by J.P. Duncan. Any further discussion? Any public comments? State your name and where you live.
Sarah Moore, Fayetteville, Arkansas. Last night, not everyone in the audience was a part of the conversation, but there was some discussion about the Rescue Act monies and the fact that originally a couple of months ago there was conversation about having full dialogue and conversation about the portfolio of things that the rescue monies can cover, and talking about the asks that have been given by department heads and by elected officials of needs across the county that could be looked at. I mean, things like improved water infrastructure, expanding broadband, you know, looking at behavioral health needs and filling gaps. It's a very broad and inclusive portfolio of services that this rescue money can be used for. This is a windfall. This is a once-in-a-million lifetime to really be visionary. It's incredibly disappointing that we're looking right now at going ahead and trying to move forward with something that I've heard could possibly be $20 million, half or more of the budget of the rescue monies. What I'm asking and what came up before was a conversation from a couple of months ago. This money is still in an interim rules period. Why don't we sit down and have a conversation about the full portfolio of things that we could potentially address within the community? Maybe this has happened one-on-one with different individuals. Maybe there's been some, you know, back conversations that other folks maybe have additional information that could be helpful to the public. But at this time, I haven't felt that as a community member that there's been a full and thoroughly vetted potential of investment that we could do with these rescue monies. I'm seeing little areas piecemealed, which will end up inevitably taking all of that money. Additionally, some of these investments that we're talking about, I'm not hearing any conversation about the ongoing cost for a juvenile center to run it with the expansion. We know that the jail had been historically running over the sales tax revenue, and so it was pulling from general fund. What will happen when we expand it? What will be needed for maintenance? What will be needed for staffing? I'd like to hear more vetting before we're making a decision that's going to be something that my 5 and my 9-year-old will inherit. So I would really ask that we slow down, that we pause and table this, and we have a very thorough discussion, because these are a lot of dollars that we will never see again. Thank you.
Public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Beth Koger. I live in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So I was here last night and heard some of the presentation that the sheriff made and that was made by others. But what's bothering me about this, it seems like 2019 all over again. In 2019, this court paid for and hired experts to come in assess our entire criminal justice system. They did that, and they came back with a report called the Criminal Justice Assessment Study last fall. As I said in the community, I can only see two things from that report, that study, that has actually been implemented. We formed the CJCC, and we funded one program that can take up to 10 minutes one time. That study is full of recommendations. It's a pathway forward. And they didn't just make this stuff up for Washington County. The recommendations and what that assessment suggests that we do here in Washington County, it's working in other jurisdictions. It's working in other places. There's no reason it can't work here. But we have to take steps and do it. I don't see us doing that. So why are we moving forward and spending maybe $18 to $20 million, and that's taxpayers' money, to build the larger jail now when we haven't given what we have, we haven't used what we have to even try to make change. I hear all the time about how things used to be at the jail. We're still following policies and procedures at the jail from 45 and 50 years ago. I hear stories about how on Christmas Eve in 1980-something, we had one person in the jail and he got to go home for Christmas Eve, spend the time with his family, he came back. We don't have that now, as everyone can tell. We're way past that. If we don't take steps now to change the way we're doing things, we will never have a jail in Washington County that's large enough to house everybody. What we're actually doing is we're housing poor people. Do you think there's many people at the jail who are sitting in jail now? If they have a bond set and they have the money, they're not going to be sitting there. They're going to pay and get out. The people who are poor cannot. Another thing is, have you done a cost analysis of how much it will cost to run the jail after it's increased? Because when this came up before, we already paid 1/4 cent sales tax. The court wanted another 1/4 cent sales tax to fund the operation and maintenance of the increased jail. So are we looking at having to raise taxes down the road to pay for all this? Because as someone said last night, this is a one-time windfall. We won't have that again. So we need to think about that. And I just ask that you give the assessment, give what the experts have told us a chance to work before we move forward with all these millions of dollars that we need to use in other areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment.
Hello, I'm Richard Tiffany. I live on Willow Avenue, just down the hill. Looking at the sheriff's plan for a jail expansion, down near the bottom, he has an item 4 where he says that in a previous study several years ago that at least 1/4 of the jail was housing mentally ill people. And that he talked about that we have plans for a crisis stabilization unit that has 16 beds, and that's insufficient for probably 150 people that are currently in the jail. And so the solution to that is to build a bigger jail, where really what we need is more facilities for mental health issues. When somebody that has a mental health issue goes in the jail, they don't get help. They spend some time, they get kicked out, they come back, they're in over and over again. It doesn't solve the problem, where I think that with some mental health assistance that it would provide a way for people to get out of the loop of being cycled through the county jail. Also, when COVID came, we had over 700 people in the county jail, and the sheriff was saying at that point, looking for jail expansion, that there's nothing we can do about it. Once COVID came and the sheriff decided that we really needed to have some space for isolation for COVID, that he was able to, with the coordination of judges and the prosecutor, to reduce the population to below 400 for several months. That showed that what we were trying to say at that point, that there are alternatives to housing people who just are too poor to make bail. And I know that there's some issues with failure to appear, but supervising the people who are released would be a lot less expensive than expanding a jail and housing those people. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Public comment.
So I'm Clint Schneckloth, and I live in East Fayetteville, 3205 East Charing Cross. Last month, Jim Wilson asked me if I knew Jesus and whether I knew him personally. And I wanted to...
Mr. Schneckloff?
Yeah.
We're not going to address the court directly. You can direct your comments to me.
Okay,
And
great.
I would appreciate you staying on task here about what we're trying to discuss.
I think it's public comment, so I get to define how it's related or on task, and I'll get there. So I was baptized a couple of days actually after I was born into Christ. It was a service in the Quad Cities, Davenport, Iowa. I grew up in the Christian faith and spent a lot of time reading the Bible when I grew up. I spent a lot of time reading the Bible my whole life. One of the things that has really become important to me as someone who's just really loves Jesus is that I notice that Jesus wasn't really into jails and prisons. In fact, one of the closest men that Jesus was close to, John the Baptist, was imprisoned and decapitated by the state. Jesus himself was held by the police state of the time, executed, up on a cross, as you're familiar. And what we have now, interestingly, is we have a court that considers itself Christian. Almost all of you have communicated with me in some way or another about your Christianity, whether you tell me that you pray or you tell me that, some of you send Bible quotes to me. Some of you ask me about my faith as a kind of a test for whether or not you're going to value my opinion or not. And what's interesting to me is that what you're deciding to do is to take a really large amount of money that has come to the county for services in our county, and you want to use them in a way that's really just basically antithetical to the way of Jesus and the Jesus that I love. I understand why you're doing it. You grew up playing with toys where if there was a square, you had to drop a block in the square, and if there was a circle, you had to drop a ball in the circle. And so you haven't really often been given the opportunity as the kind of men that you are to actually grow up and mature and to have an imagination. But the imagination of Jesus that we're invited into...
Thank you, that's time. Your time has expired.
The imagination that we're invited in.
Additional public comments. We've got 1 minute left. Does anybody else want to speak? Okay. We have a motion on the floor to pass item number 15 to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation. Motion made by me, seconded by J.P. Duncan. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? No. Item number 15 moves to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation. Item number 16. Item number 16 is an ordinance de-appropriating surplus amounts from full-time salaries for various departments and restoring those amounts to unappropriated reserves as required by the 2021 budget controls for the second quarter of 2021. If you guys are familiar, we have an ordinance that comes up quarterly to where any unfilled positions, the unspent salaries and monies are swept back into the general fund. And so this is what this is. I would entertain motions on this ordinance.
So moved.
I have a motion to pass by J.P. Duncan to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation, second by J.P. Wilson. Any further discussion? Public comment? push the man, there's a little man on the microphone. Do you see the head and the man? Yeah, there you go.
Awesome.
There you
Thank you. So what I was saying is that you lack this imagination, and what has landed in the court's lap by the strange kind of twists and turns of American history. Clearly, Sam Duncan has to go to the bathroom. Have a good time. Is
Mr. Schneckloff, that's your last warning about addressing other members of the court.
But
I've warned you that you can address me.
Great.
Those are the rules.
Patrick?
One more warning. and
Great.
That's it.
I'll
Now,
just
please
address you,
continue.
Patrick.
Yeah.
Regularly, when people speak here that you all disagree with, you leave. And the point of public comment is to listen to everybody, including those you disagree with. It happens all the time. And I've even seen you during public comment, like turn around, not pay attention. This is the common behavior of this court. So that's fine. I'll address it just to you. Patrick, I'd love it if you would hold your fellow JPs to a greater level of maturity and accountability to sit here and listen to what people bring, even if you don't like it, because that's your job. So going back to what I was saying, this lack of imagination means that you have like $20 million that's landed in your lap. Strange how this works, you know, federal government tosses this money your way. And because you lack imagination, you think, oh, we have a block, we have to put it in a square. The square that we have, because we're a county, is the sheriff's department and the jail, because that's the big expensive thing in the county. Except you don't want to fund any of the other things that would actually keep people out of the jail and would actually save us a lot of money. I just listened to all of you like interrogate the two women that were up here who are judges who are saying that we need a much smaller amount of money to address the pipeline to the jail. And you had all kinds of questions about that. But in the meantime, you're going to very quickly take all of this money and you're going to shift it into the jail and expand the jail and present us with long-term costs. And all of those costs and all the things that you're going to commit those monies to are not the way of Jesus. Those things down there at the bottom of the hill are the things that killed Christ. Those are the things that whipped Christ. Those are the systems that persecuted the church, the early church that were followers of Christ.
Thank you. Your time has expired.
Great.
Additional public comments? Okay. We had a motion to pass item 16.1 to the full quorum court. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Item 16.1 passes the full quorum court. All right, item number 17. An ordinance recognizing revenue in the amount of $261,742 in the high-intensity drug trafficking areas HIDA grant fund and appropriating $261,742 from the HIDA grant fund to the HIDA 2022 budget for 2022. This is a regularly occurring grant that we get to combat drug trafficking in our area. I'd entertain a motion on this particular ordinance. I have a motion to pass the full quorum court with the due pass recommendation by J.P. Ussery, second by J.P. Wilson. Any further discussion? Public comment? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Item 17.1 moves to the full quorum court with the due pass recommendation. Item number 18. An ordinance appropriating the amount of $3,427,272.51 from the Coronavirus Relief Fund to the General Reserve Fund for 2021. J.P. Duncan.
So this funding was received as reimbursement for previously incurred expenses. So I move that we take this money and put it into the reserve account.
I have a motion to pass item number 18 to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation. A second by J.P. Wilson. Discussion? JP Rios Tavern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little surprised, actually, that this committee is moving on to me without having any discussion among yourselves. But I wanted to actually correct the record on what JP Duncan says that the purpose of this ordinance is for. And we've had this discussion before. We've had this discussion at our meetings back in February. You know, this CARES Act money was decided to be given to all the counties in Arkansas by the CARES Act Steering Committee, which is run by the state of Arkansas. We were reimbursed for already budgeted expenses. We weren't reimbursed for things that we spent, you know, that were extraordinary and not part of the budget. So I want to, just correct the record about that. We submitted, I think, about $13 million worth of expenses to the state in order to get this money. All but about $500,000 of that was already part of the budget. It was mostly, what we got reimbursed for was mostly already budgeted law enforcement and emergency personnel salaries. So to say that, the reason that we're moving this into the general fund is because it's a reimbursement, I think doesn't tell the whole picture of what these funds are for, how these funds came to us. And I don't really understand the reason that we're moving the rest of these funds into the general fund at this time. To me, the importance of having them in their own separate account is accountability and transparency to the public. Once they're moved into the general fund, the public has really no idea how these funds are being spent, separate from any other funds that are already in there. As of today, we have a very solid accounting of how these CARES Act funds have been spent, what they've been spent on. I feel that this quorum court has so far done a very good job, actually, of actually using these funds. 100%, I think, of everything that we've used these on have been COVID-related so far. And so I think the concern about moving these funds into the general fund is that at that point, we might be spending them on anything that may not be what they were intended for. And just to go back to what they were intended for, I have the minutes of the CARES Act money, CARES Act Steering Committee meeting from September 9th, 2020, where they talked about why they were going to decide to give this money to counties. Secretary Larry Walther, who's, some of you know, he's the head of the DFA, he and Governor Hutchinson met with the CARES Act Steering Committee, along with Chris Valines, head of the Arkansas Association of Counties. And in the minutes, Secretary Walther noted the disbursement allows cities and counties to evaluate where their needs are and potentially fund food banks, provide rental and mortgage assistance, and assist other areas to a great degree with COVID-related issues. There's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of debate about what these funds were intended to be used for. But it's here in the minutes in black and white, from the steering committee. I know that JP Madison brought forward an ordinance early this year. We had hundreds of people writing to us in our emails. It was very contentious to do just exactly some of the things that Secretary Walther and the governor intended these funds to be used for, to fund food assistance, to fund homelessness and things like that. And I know the majority of this court voted against that. So that's that. But I think that for purposes of accountability and transparency to the public, we should keep these funds where they are and continue to spend them in the way that they were intended. Thank you.
JP Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think JP Rio Stafford said a lot of what I was going to say. We've had these monies for 9 months or so. We've tried to have public conversations as to what we should do with this. We determined that we didn't feel that it was in the best interest of the county to spend all of the money, but we also didn't feel that it was in the best interest of the county to also save all the money. So my question is, and I guess this would be directed to the sponsor of this ordinance, what is the rationale? Why this amount of money and why now? We've had 9 months. We haven't done anything with a lot of this money. The things that we have used the money for, I echo what JP Rio Stafford said, have been really good things that we need to do. But we know that there are pressing needs. We do have a food insecurity problem here in Northwest Arkansas. And in fact, the next item on the agenda is an ordinance to ask for some of this money to be allocated for that. So I would just like to know, what is the rationale behind the use of this amount and why now? Some people have said that it was because of the amount of money, but we allocated money to returning home and to other community resources. So I would just like to know, what is the rationale for this, since we can't discuss it privately and we haven't really had a conversation at all publicly. So if that's allowed, I would just like the rationale for why now and why this amount.
JP Duncan.
So we have an unbelievable opportunity with the American Rescue Plan and $23 million this year and $23 million to come to do a lot of those different things, a lot of the requests that are out there. This money is unrestricted and can be used elsewhere, and I think that's where the money is best fit. So that's why I proposed the ordinance, and we'll see how the rest of the court votes.
Further discussion? Public comment?
Good evening, Josh Moody, Fayetteville, Arkansas. JP Duncan's rationale just now undercuts what was said months ago, that said that the money that is coming is going to have ways that it could be used or should be used, and this is money that can be used for anything. So I feel like the argument has flipped depending on the bias. I had hoped to get it in on item 15, but wasn't acknowledged by the chair. But I'm speaking on this too, so I'll just go ahead and cover it all now. It'll still be under 3 minutes. I believe that J.P. Deakins was opposed to a $40 million jail expansion back in 2019. Now that he's finance chair, he is exploring spending half of that for the same purpose. That's after publicly accusing other JPs of being greedy for trying to spend CARES money on pet projects like helping small businesses, repairing public-facing county facilities, feeding hungry people, and housing homeless or would-be homeless people. We currently have more pretrial detainees, nearly 400, than we did exactly 2 years ago. Those are our innocent until proven guilty residents who are mostly locked up for nonviolent criminal allegations at $62 per day. Quick math puts that at $744,000 a month and close to $9 million a year. Our Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee has gone underground. Are they making any progress? What do we have to show for it? Take a look at Sebastian County to see how we can make our community safer and save taxpayer dollars at the same time. We in Washington County take pride in being leaders in the state, but are quickly falling behind as others are looking to innovate rather than perpetuate what is clearly not working. Crime going up, more jails. We all know the definition of insanity. Let's do something different. Let's invest in the future rather than throw more money at punishing the past. Meanwhile, we're looking to move the remaining $3.5 million of the CARES fund to general funds. That's a creative way to ensure that we don't use any of it for community services. Though based on the juvenile judge's earlier budget request, I can definitely tell you where a good chunk of it could go. Dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline is a very worthwhile goal. Please remember, of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you.
Public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Beth Coger. I live in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I just, like JP Washington said, we've asked to talk about these funds many times, and we haven't really had a good public discussion. I think everyone sitting here knows why that money was given to us. It was given to us to help people in the community and small businesses. It was given to us to help with food, shelter, basic necessities that people need. So I know you have the votes to move the money, and you're probably going to do that. It's probably going to pass. But as has been stated, how will you account to the public for the CARES Act dollars if it goes into the general fund? Thank you.
Public comments.
Remarkably, my name is still Clint Schneckloth, and I still live in East Fayetteville. So a couple additional things. One, what we've learned over the last 9 months is that the crew that's largely sitting here around Patrick Deakins, the chair, is ultra right-wing conservative in their values, and therefore is really lacking an interest in listening to kind of a moderate view that the CARES fund should have been used for care in community. If you remember way back, you initially got a letter from really a cross-section of nonprofit leaders that simply said, hey, you have this funds, here are the big needs that we see in the community around housing, around hunger, et cetera. And there was literally zero interest in listening to any of that, no openness to that conversation, and then no action. So you didn't follow through on any of that. And it's part of a larger pattern of behavior that comes out of this court of just not being interested in the views of other people, especially if those views are coming from women. So we know, for example, that Patrick Deakins got on social media the day after one meeting and made fun of a woman who was in here for her armpit hair, therefore the armpit hair presentation. By the way, just as an aside, we're all made in the image of God. You guys have hot armpits, all right? They're beautiful. Your armpits are beautiful. Hope Hightower's armpits are beautiful and not worth you mocking on social media for any reason. Ever. But it's not just Hope Hightower who you targeted. It's also, like, for example, just yesterday, Judy Costello, a person who works for Shiloh Museum and lives in Springdale. And instead of just replying to her in a kind way for her misunderstanding of your social media posts, you immediately started accusing her of being part of some kind of weird misinformation campaign and wanted to shame her in front of the entire quorum court. Just unnecessarily, when you could have just replied to her. And it's not just that, it's like just tonight when JP Washington had a simple question about the order of these two things, you just completely dismissed her right away and her point that this next thing that's coming up after this one needs to be addressed before we move on Sam Duncan's motion. But of course, because Sam Duncan is a white dude, you're much more interested in listening to and forwarding his thing than you ever are in listening to Chandra Washington's appeal.
Thank
and
you.
the list
That's
just
time.
goes on.
Any additional public comments? Okay, ready to vote. I have a motion to pass item 18.1 by JP Duncan, a second by, please remind, JP Wilson. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? No. This passes to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation. One more outburst, and we're going to invite you to leave. Item number 19, an ordinance appropriating $350,000 from the Coronavirus Relief Fund 1005 to pass through payments line item in the Coronavirus Relief Budget 100500123 for 2021. JP Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this ordinance is asking to appropriate $350,000 from the CARES Act funds that we received to Tri-Cycle Farms that is located here in Fayetteville. And I've asked Mr. Bennett, Kelly, and Karen, and they can come and share with you more about the needs that they have.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
When you look at the microphone, there's a little person. There you go.
It's on.
All right, good deal.
How's this? Can you hear me?
It's good.
Hi. Thank you, Chandra, for coming to the farm and meeting me and learning about Tri-Cycle and then sponsoring this ordinance. I wanted to thank you right off the bat. And thanks for the court for listening to me and hearing me out. I'd like to share some things about Tri-Cycle and the impacts that COVID-19 had on our nonprofit. In 2011, I founded Tri-Cycle Farms because I'd heard about the statistic of 1 in 4 children in Arkansas being food insecure, and I started to dig a little deeper and found that in Washington County, 17% of the folks that we call our neighbors are living with food insecurity as a daily issue, underemployment, and so these issues really struck a chord with me. So I changed my whole life direction, bought 2 acres in the center of Fayetteville, and felt like that we needed to work with people in order to teach folks to grow food again. Teach someone to fish, and then they have fish the rest of their life. So we've worked for 10 years building partnerships with the University of Arkansas, with the churches that surround us in the area. And I've never been before this court and asked for anything before, but I realized after talking to Chandra about how much that we've been actually serving the county. And some of the things that we do in terms of programming with children in schools, with the juvenile detention coming out and visiting the farm and having work days that let them escape from the detention. And we've been doing that for several years. But, what's happened to us in COVID after March 13, we had a full year planned. We had Fayetteville had agreed to let us have 8 amplified events. We were going to be able to raise our own funds. We were going to have movie nights and, the Pesto Fest, maybe y'all have heard of that. We raised $25,000, but we've lost at least $80,000 a year in the past year and a half. We've lost half of our staff. And, for this past year, we've still only missing 2 or 3 days. Moved from the store Whole Foods food recovery program 5 days a week. We've moved almost 90,000 pounds of food. We've made new partnerships and added natural grocers. We're probably going to approach the numbers that you see there. We're probably going to approach closer to 200,000 pounds of food or 100 tons that 3 of us and a handful of volunteers have delivered to all of those partners on that list. We've shifted, and also how we are supporting the county is we're moving this food waste that would be going to the garbage, and we're making sure that with these partners that they're distributing that food and getting it into families and children's plates within 24 hours to 48 hours from when we deliver it to them. And, we've been struggling. We're exhausted. And, you know, what we're asking for is help on this. The 2 years that we feel like we've gotten behind, where we have all of the materials, we have the foundation in place, we're going to build a 23 by 43 hydroponics greenhouse, start a new farmer program and an internship program so that the dreams of Tricycle could happen where people are actually learning how to grow food. But what we encountered in COVID-19 was that all of our partners that we serve have increased needs and new families coming at least 200 to 300%. So instead of focusing on the farm, we shifted our focus to delivering food and finding new partners to deliver more food. So what we're proposing is we need help to get back to where we were in 2019, but we're talking to Taya Nash at the Head Start of Washington County. We want to expand on the number of stores that we're picking up food from and then help the 8 locations of the Head Start program in Northwest Arkansas, and especially the Head Start of Washington County. I don't ask for help very much. We've normally stood on our own 2 feet and worked with our donors, and we've written our grants. We've gotten some recent support from the Walmart Foundation. We're asking for support for the Community Foundation, but this kind of support is what's going to push us 2 years into the future where we can start making our own money, earning our own money, and never coming before this board again. Can I answer
I'm
any
sorry,
questions?
if you said it, I missed your name. What was your name?
My name is Don Bennett.
Don
I'm the-
Bennett. Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes.
Any discussion? JP Simons.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bennett, thank you for this information, because before you handed this out, I was going to ask what your metrics are, what your estimated impact in the community is. And I see that it's in the measurement of pounds. Do you happen to be able to educate me on what that looks like as far as households or individuals? I mean, 90, almost 100,000 pounds worth of food moved year to date. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
How many people does that translate into?
Well, Feeding America says that each pound of food is about 1.2 pounds of food per meal. That's and for our total program of 577,000 pounds, we've actually moved and delivered 480,000 meals. You know, our goals with this program is to expand it to where it's getting close to double. We've added another store. We're doing all of Natural Grocers as well as all of Whole Foods. These are long-term partnerships. What we do is we guarantee that we're filling a gap. What we've learned from, you know, our partners like the University of Arkansas Full Circle Pantry, that students, grad students, and staff are in fact food insecure. That you know, at for instance, St. James Missionary Baptist Church, we started working with them in 2016 when they were in the neighborhood on North and Leverett, and they were serving about 50 to 60 individuals that were coming up and picking up twice a week. They would distribute to those 50 or 60 individuals, and then the next week there'd be 50 or 60 different individuals. Now they're serving 700 families. You know, and they've moved over in the Willow Heights direction, and we deliver to them twice a week, and then I also use our capacity to find other types of resources. So food is just one of the resources that we have distributed. We've helped to create a resident-run pantry at Chestnut. That's off of Leverett. We've been serving another resident-run pantry at Washington Plaza. That's off Dean Street. We've even taken out groups of people and volunteers and helped to double the capacity of the West Fork Community Garden. That's right there in the center of the city. You know, it's just like we see a need, we fill a gap. But this was so important to the environment it's so important to the fact that our landfills are filling with so much food, that there's so much cost involved in dealing with the gases that come with the foods. I've worked as the chair of the Grow Fayetteville task force, and we've shifted to where there is the ability for people in neighborhoods to drop off food waste at different points in the city so that we can increase how much food is actually going to make food waste compost, which we're also a distributor at Tricycle in the center of that neighborhood of food waste compost to individuals who want to come and get that and help their gardens. I don't know if you noticed the Plant Shared, we created a whole new program at COVID where we have plant carts that we start seeds. We also recover plants that are discarded. We take care of them, freshen them up, and we have distributed close to 2,000 plants and actually helped 625 households. And, you start helping with food plants and somebody gardening, well, that's a whole lot more food than just one meal or two. That's also giving them power, stand on their own 2 feet, and to be self-evident.
Thank you. Educate me, when you say food waste, is that a separate component of what you're doing than what you're receiving from Whole Foods and natural grocers? What you get from these 4 donating partners, and it sounds like you're growing that list, is it product on the shelf that's expiring that they're having to cycle off that now they can give to you? Or is it overstock? Are you using their purchasing power to purchase? Educate me on what are they giving you, and what do you mean by food waste?
That's a great question, because I think I get that question a lot. And, the manufacturer's date doesn't mean it's bad by. Sure. It definitely doesn't mean it's inedible, and it's not full of the same nutrition as if you'd ate it 3 days before. We have categories, and I think there is a chart on the back that kind of breaks it down into dry goods, meats and frozen, breads and bakery, dairy, eggs, prepared foods. It's everything that is in Whole Foods. If it's normally when we pick it up, it has 1 more day before it's even expired. If there's a damaged can, if there's a missed shipment or a mispick, or a product line is going out and has to make way for another. Every square foot of space in a grocery store is critical to that grocery store. So, and it doesn't pay them to send something back on a truck or get it going into the right direction. It's just written off as waste. Now, what they normally do is put it into a crusher. Some of the things that they've done before is had some partners doing food recovery, but what they couldn't offer them is consistency. We've missed 7 days since the first day we started this program. We missed 2 days this year because Whole Foods' computer system in Texas went down and they couldn't write it off to us. Not our fault. So we've had a few weather-related days, a few truck breaking down days, and but we haven't missed. And, during COVID, while we were struggling, because normally we also on the farm work with 17 unique individuals doing volunteer work on the farm. We give that experience to grow food, harvest food, taste food, kids coming through, families coming through, and we went down to 0. That was about 5,000 hours worth of work that's donated by the community. But in terms of protecting our community's health, and also maintaining that we were healthy and could continue to deliver to these families and these partners that we've had for such a long time that we're counting on the food that we're bringing them, we couldn't risk it, so we had to stay with that. But if you walk through Whole Foods and you just look at all of the shelves, and that also includes vitamins, supplements, minerals, flowers, plants, everything that's there, we're the recipient of. They tore apart their bar, they took apart their tables and chairs and bar stools, and we got in touch with Monique Jones at the St. James Baptist Church Pantry. I don't know if you know, but they also put together a warming center in their new community center to help with the homeless situation when we got so cold. And so I said, you need some tables and chairs. This room looks empty. And I just basically connect a business partner with a nonprofit partner and help to fill their needs. I've done it with refrigerators, we've done it with straw, we've done it with food, and I guess what I'm asking you to help me do is let me take Tricycle and Tricycle's dream and push it a couple of years into the future, finish our greenhouse, develop this partnership with Head Start, triple this number that's on the front page in terms of how much we've diverted, and at the same time, let you know though, we're also have developed a partnership with Full Circle Pantry with the community engagement with Razorback Food Recovery so that we can develop what Tricycle has developed in a recovery program and a GAP program and define it, implement training, and allow other organizations to do the same thing, because we're talking about 3 grocery stores right now. We'll get a 4th, but there's still how many grocery stores in Springdale, and Fayetteville, and Rogers, and Bentonville?
Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bennett, can you discuss with us a little more about your plans for the distribution center?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So we have a beautiful stone house that was built in 1937 at the terminus of Sycamore and Garland Avenue. We're essentially central in the center of Fayetteville. And, that old house has a 19 by 19 garage with a heaving floor, that needs to be replaced. But we want to turn that 400 square foot into a place where we can actually capture the food and hold it for 18 to no more than 24 hours. We can also more equitably distribute, if we get too much of one item, and instead of just pouring that on one of our partners, we can divert it and help another partner with the same with the same food by being able to hold it temporarily. Also, it gives us the space to move our plant carts and more efficiently grow more plants. So both plant share and food share will be enhanced, and we'll take basically a non-heated and cooled space and make it secure with a generator backup power, and a place that can be an emergency center for a neighborhood. Very soon, the bike trail will run the whole south side of the farm. And when that happens, we'll actually have a greater access to a neighborhood. And when you look at our neighborhood, and I always look at it in terms of 3 Washington County census areas, about 4 square miles, there's 18,000 people that live there. And what you won't know, and that people you maybe can't tell, but there's 7,300 people living below the level of poverty within 1 mile of the farm. And for the longest time, there was no east-west connection, so it was very difficult to even get to the grocery store if you didn't have a vehicle. So these are areas where we're going to be able to partner again with our Trinity Church and the Friendly Fridge, and we're trying to actually install what we call the Tricycle Farms Food Locker, where we can shop for up to 30 families that have specific dietary needs, have medical needs, and have an access point where they can pick it up anytime. And our committee work, we've learned that people who are food insecure are working families, and sometimes they have 1, 2, and 3 jobs. My answer to a friend who told me, I have 2 jobs, I'm looking for a 3rd, and that's why my house looks like that. And I told her, you have a beautiful backyard, why don't we turn it into a garden? And that was one of the beginning steps of how Tricycle came to be.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question? Okay.
I believe we need a motion. JP Washington?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we all will agree that hunger is not really a partisan issue. Mr. Bennett has really made it clear the number of families that are affected in Washington County by food insecurity. And so I would hope that we would figure out a way that we can do both, that we can save money, that we can transfer some of this money to the general fund, but we can also help our community partners. So I move that this ordinance be passed to the full quorum court with a due pass recommendation.
I have a motion to pass to the full quorum court.
Second.
I have a second by JP Essery. Any further discussion? JP Simons?
I'm going to stick to my theme tonight and ask, I'm assuming you've looked into grant opportunities. You're pretty thorough. I would assume that you've already gone through that route.
Yes, and we're continuing to do it. And I tell you, one of the most difficult things to do is get money that supports salaries from grants.
Sure.
One of the things that I've always gotten the cart before the horse, and I'm really trying to get the horse now so that we can pull this cart and move forward. It's so difficult to get human capital paid for. You know, we've bought the house, bought the land, we have the materials to build the greenhouse, and we've just gotten a grant from the Walmart Foundation that's giving us a brand new van, which makes us even more agile in this type of programming. But we need people. We're tired, and we need some help. And you know, I definitely want to know that we're going to fulfill that dream of having a new farmer and start going back when COVID lets us do it and start teaching and growing food at, you know, in several ways, you know, in the ground, but also hydroponically, aeroponically, utilizing the highest standards. The greenhouse itself, when it's finished, and we're going to look for grants for solar, it will be one of the most energy efficient greenhouses in the world, which at that point will be a net positive. So it'll almost be free to operate other than the farmer that's going to be the specialist in the hydroponics. We have the connections to Whole Foods to then turn around and do cash crops. We have a business plan that's $75,000. Not only will we not be asking for grants on that, those grants will be focused on paying salaries. And so we're going to start building our own economy in this circle that we're creating in town.
And the time frame I'm looking at, so program and finance director is a 2-year salary, distribution system specialist is a 2-year salary. Have you considered phasing that in and coming maybe only asking for 1 year to start up?
Well, any support that you can give will be most appreciated. I think, you know, grantors do this all the time, and it's understandable because years are a recognizable amount of time. But what we need is 2 years to build something, and because this is permanent that we're going to build in, and and you won't see me again. I can promise you that. I never expected to come down and ask for help before, but COVID really set us back, and we thought we were going to be on the road of doing this ourselves and not needing this kind of help. And if grantors offered those kinds of things and, capital improvements, they will not, I've got the refrigerators, I've got the van, I've got the plant carts, I've got the materials and the seeds to start. I've got the greenhouse. It's just a matter of having those things that push those buttons to get us going and kind of guarantee that we have some sort of, safety net so that we can get this done in the 2 years that I think really it's going to take.
Awesome. Kind of my final comments on this, as you are well aware, because it seems like you're working with many of them in our community, there are a ton of great causes out there trying to address the very, very same thing that you are. And my push since we started hearing about the money coming available is how do we use this money to create the most impact on a sustainable basis, right? One-offs are really hard to justify if we can look at something that's long-term. And it sounds like what you're wanting to do here is impactful and sustainable, which I appreciate.
And replicable.
I'll shift to my colleague, JP Washington. Have we looked into the ARP funding? Is there money available there as opposed to the CARES funds? I have not either. So I might put an asterisk here to follow up to see if there's eligibility through that. Obviously, that's a much bigger pot of money. Thank you, Mr. Bennett, for your work.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? I think we appreciate you.
Okay.
Any public comments?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, I'm Richard Tiffany, and I still live just down the hill. I have been a volunteer at the St. James Food Bank since November, every Tuesday mornings. It's been a couple weeks since I've talked to Monique, who runs things there, that she said she had invited you all to come visit on a Tuesday morning. And at the time that I talked to her, nobody from the Quorum Court had come. And I think it would be helpful for you to do that, to get some perspective about the food issues that we have in the county. Tricycle Farms has been a major contributor. They're not the only ones. We do get food from other places, and I'm just a helper, so I don't know all the technical details about where all the food comes from, but I know that we move a lot of food, and invite you to come visit some Tuesday morning. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Public comments?
Hi, Sarah Moore, Fayetteville. I'm actually, surprisingly, believe it or not, didn't know about this being on tonight's schedule and just noticed, but I'm the actual delivery coordinator for the St. James Food Pantry. And so I do work with Monique, and we get a lot of Tricycle Farms foods. And I will tell you, much like Dawn is talking about, this money in particular, these CARES monies being unrestricted, and talking about, food insecurity, small businesses. The second round of PPP on small businesses, only 70% of the people that applied for that got declined. And so there's definitely a need on these unrestricted CARES monies for different things in the community. And when you look specifically at these kind of safety net programs that have been out there, like Dawn just shared with you, that you've had money to do the program, but you couldn't pay for people. So as I've gone around, I've talked to people that I see getting, pictures with elected officials, with police departments coming and helping them. They're telling me, Sarah, I'm on SNAP. Sarah, I'm going to have to apply for the rental assistance. Sarah, I'm on state insurance. Like, I'm barely making ends meet. So no one knew what was going to happen when COVID, came about. We started doing a delivery program. He's right. From March of 20 to today, the St. James Food Bank Food Pantry is now giving out a 650% increase. And, lately in the last couple of weeks, it's starting to increase. With the COVID numbers increasing, we're actually having partners come back to us and asking, we just got hit up by community clinic for people who've been quarantined or hit by COVID. So I really applaud, and I appreciate Patrick Deacons did come out, and he saw the operation, and so he saw it firsthand. I do appreciate that. We do welcome any of you out there. But what I would say is, kind of going back to what the other ordinance was, this money is special in a way because it doesn't have the certain strings attached. You're going to hear from other community partners who are just like Dawn, who don't have the events, do not have the funding mechanisms in place, and don't know how they're going to continue. And they're some of the people that are taking care of feeding our families here living in poverty, of being that fresh produce in the box to get them through with their kids. And so I'd ask you to really consider supporting this, because he does support our operations, and there are times when Dawn comes, we're grabbing little tidbits, and it's barely getting our boxes out the door full to give a dignified box. And also, these are families that don't necessarily get to go and shop at Whole Foods. So what dignity we get to give those families too. So we're all appreciative for what he does. And I wanted to point out too, You heard a lot about Fayetteville, but that food that Don's giving us, it's going to Springdale, it's going to Prairie Grove, it's going to Lincoln. It's across all of Washington County. So his impact is felt across all of Washington County. Thank you.
Public comments. Did you have something to add? JP Simons?
Thank you, Chair. To just echo on the tail end of that, I wonder if the cities are contributing any to this with their CARES funds. I know Fayetteville was, I don't know Fayetteville's number, but I think Springdale was about 20 million. So, Mr.
I just wanted to say, I talked to Mark McKinnon, and I'm supposed to go ask too. So I'm asking wherever I can get some help.
JP Duncan?
I'm wondering if this would be better served to be part of the larger discussion with American Rescue Plan funding, because it obviously seems like a great program, and I know that we're going to have a lot of requests that are similar. So I'll move to table this, if that's the proper motion, and add this to discussion with how we allocate American Rescue funding.
I believe I'd need a time certain, table to a time certain meeting. We have a motion by JP Duncan to table this, and I'm asking for a time certain. Just a second. Let me give the mic to JP. Now we got it. Okay. JP Johnson?
No, I think we have a lot more to learn about this. I saw this 30 minutes ago, so I'd like to do some more homework before we make a decision.
I do want to clarify, do you have
October.
I have a motion by JP Duncan to table until the October budget meeting. Do I have a second? Second. Second by JP Johnson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
I believe that's tabled. Final item on our agenda is public comments. 12-minute public comment period with a limit of 3 minutes per person. Public comments.
I know it's been a long night and you want to get going, but I just wanted to leave you kind of with these parting thoughts. I mean, there have been a few things brought up that I really hope that we'll consider in regard to when we now are talking about the rescue monies, and maybe this is, a good idea for the rescue monies. Judge Warren tonight brought up some good points with her budget in regard to, I want to work on some programs and figure out with my team how I help to get, kids and families whole again, and so that they don't stay in the system. And so we really are focused on wanting to reduce recidivism, and we want to also get a better return on our investment with our taxpayer dollars. And so I was real excited at seeing the number, the budget number that is a very efficient, spend for what she's wanting to do, and it seems like a good investment. So here we're talking about food security, when she's probably talking to some of those families, they're probably, one of the issues they have are certain, insecurities around food and housing and some of their basic needs. So I really would encourage this court to consider having a full conversation with those rescue monies. It seems like there's a lot of question marks around, could it be, food systems? Could it be these infrastructure? And so it feels like we need to maybe ask the chief of staff or the county judge maybe to facilitate, get our attorney involved, because yes, the devil's in the details and the specific language. We want to be very accountable to that. But at the end of the day, it sounds like we're not fully understanding the scope of what it can cover. And so I don't want us to miss an opportunity again, and this once in a million opportunity to look at the full scope of what we possibly can impact the county. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Public comments.
I have a procedural question more than a comment, but on the last item, J.P. Washington made a motion and J.P. Usry seconded the motion. and it was not voted on, and then another motion was renewed and seconded. So I'm just curious, was the first motion that was seconded not supposed to be voted on?
It was in an effective state.
Yeah, this
It
is
was-
public comment.
Okay. Well, I'm just putting on record that I believe that it was procedurally mishandled this evening, the last item. Josh Moody, Fayetteville, Arkansas. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Public comments.
Hi, I'm Sarah Ashley. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. I am a county employee. I'm the prosecutor that handles the FENS cases, the Family Needed Services cases. Truancy cases are the majority of what I handle. I just wanted to just again ask that you consider adding more FENS personnel to help out with the caseloads that these people have, and these children that are being served is more than just the number of cases, because you might have one case that you have 4 children in, and there are different schools that these FENS officers need to communicate with and find out how the children are doing. I think Judge Warren mentioned that by Arkansas law, she's to get at least 2 officers for her court. There was some discussion about taking some delinquencies and evening out the caseload, but you're talking about with the delinquency officers, you already have that ideal caseload, the lower caseload around 25. When you take the FENS officers and you spread that all out, that means you're just going to have a bunch of juvenile officers that all have high caseloads. So again, I would just request that you consider with the FENS officers, that you consider taking those cases into special care. They are my passion. But when we get a child that the parents aren't making their education a priority when they're little kids, they're going to eventually come through that system. They're going to be delinquents. They're going to be adult criminals. They're going to be unemployed. They're going to cost you on that end, or they're going to cost us on this end. And that's why I just encourage you to do it on the lower end here. Also with the, are we going to get just I think there was a question from you about the, just missed a few tardies and things like that. The school is required to set what their parameters are. How many days do we consider excessive? Once they, or before they get to that point, they're required by law to say, parents, here's your letter, we have this many absences. They have several hoops that they have to go through. When they meet that excessive amount of unexcused absences, that's when they're required by law to notify my office, the prosecutor's office. I'm required by law to do a diversion or file it. If we don't have the officers to handle these diversions, to help these kids out before they go to court, they're going to end up in court. And again, it's that school truancy, it's that pipeline to prisons that we'll have
Thank
to pay for eventually.
That's time. I appreciate it. Any other public comments? All right, this meeting's adjourned.